Hello, so great to see you again. Welcome back to this week's episode of Closed by Mo. My name is Mohammed. I'm hopefully your favorite YouTube host on most things real estate. I'm also a real estate investor and a broker based out of New York City. And in this week's episode, we're going to talk about a bunch of the frauds that you're very likely to see or maybe know someone that has encountered when you're buying your first property or your second or third, whatever amount it is. These frauds, some of them I've encountered personally, and some of them I've only heard about through colleagues and other clients of mine that have run into similar situations in the past. So without further ado, let's jump right into the most common frauds to expect or to look out for when it's time for you to buy your first house or second house, whatever it is. Now, to start us off at number one with probably one of the more, I would say, common real estate frauds that you'll probably hear about in the news, especially ones that, target really vulnerable or senior homeowners, people that have a lot of equity in their home, is what we call title fraud or deed fraud. In this particular case, if you're the buyer in this transaction, you have to make sure that you're verifying that the person that you're buying the property from, the person that you're paying, whether it's in cash or mortgage, whatever it is the actual owner of the property legally and rightfully, and that they're not committing any kind of deed fraud by stealing the paperwork or forging the documentation from the original owner and then passing it off to you. In this particular instance, especially if you're buying in New York State or at least in New York City and Long Island and the surrounding areas, your attorney will be ordering a title search on your behalf. So the title company is going to want to make sure that the title records are all there, that they can trace the ownership records historically to ensure that there's no weird stuff going on in the ownership records, and that the title isn't forged in any, the title or deed aren't forged in any which way. The second type of scam is what we call phishing and email scams. And I don't mean phishing like fishing for fish, I mean phishing with a PH. Phishing and email scams are probably going to be more common than you think. The reason I say that is because when you're involved in a transaction, especially as a buyer, you're emailing your broker, you're emailing your lender, you're emailing home inspectors, you're definitely emailing your attorney, and a bunch of other parties, including insurance companies that are going to be involved in that transaction to make sure it gets to the closing table. Now, what will happen is, unfortunately, hackers will be able to identify certain weak spots in different vendors, or maybe even in your own computer system that you're using, and be able to read through these emails, and then at the right moment they might ask you to send over any personal information or private information that you really shouldn't be sharing with anyone that's not involved in that transaction. The third type of scam is what we call like a bait and switch tactic. This is something that is a little bit of a gray area because it's hard to classify what might be considered a bait and switch. For example, a bait and switch is something where you go into it with the expectation of it being, let's say, property A, and then when it comes time to close, it turns out that the property A wasn't presented properly or things weren't disclosed accurately, to now it sort of becomes property B. It's still the same building, but the facts have all completely changed. This is what we call a bait and switch tactic. In this instance, stuff like this, there are a lot of ways for you to mitigate against falling trapped to bait and switch tactics. A lot of things really sort of boil down to the actual inspection of the property itself. So when you order a home inspection, which is something I advise all my clients to never waive, when you're ordering a home inspection, you're able to actually figure out exactly what's wrong with the property to a very accurate detail, especially if the inspector knows what they're doing, to ensure that you're not going to be experiencing any kind of bait and switch tactic where the seller might try not to disclose any damage that may have happened in the property that either they were aware of and didn't want to tell you, or they just don't know or they don't remember, right? Maybe they inherited the property from someone else, or they took over the property, or they bought it from someone else and they didn't verify themselves, right? The fourth kind of scam that I see is overvaluation scams. And like overvaluation scams, they're not necessarily, I would say, scams per se. I think they're usually just misinformed homeowners or misinformed sellers that think their property is valued a lot more than what it actually is. Now, we can get into a whole conversation about commercial properties and overvaluation and forged leases and things like that, but let's focus a little bit more on the residential side of things, right? So overvaluations typically are not really going to happen, especially if you're working with a bank to acquire financing, because remember, the bank is going to be ordering an appraisal on your behalf to ensure that the value you're paying for the property, or the value that the bank is going to be lending on, actually matches the appraised value of the home, or what the independent appraiser thinks of the valuation of the home compared to all the different or similar properties that have sold in the last 6 months, 12 months, whatever valuation criteria the appraisal company is using. The fifth kind of real estate scam, which actually I've definitely seen firsthand is fake real estate agents. And I'm not trying to throw shade at any of the brokers and agents out there, but there's a lot of fake agents. And what I mean by that is maybe real estate agents that didn't renew their license, or people that claim to be real estate agents that they're not actually real estate agents. You have to always make sure that you're working with someone that is a licensed and registered real estate agent. If they're an agent, it means they're going to be registered under another brokerage. And you can also look up their license number in the Department of State records. You can also, of course, always ask them for the Department of State card as well to ensure that it's valid and that they are actually a licensed agent, because you want to make sure that you're working with someone that has a fiduciary obligation to you and is looking out for your best interest, and someone that you can technically go after should you feel that you weren't given the best advice or the best guidance that eventually started to hurt you and instead was in the other person's best interest. Now, the sixth type of fraud that you'll see is what we call mortgage fraud. This is something typically that will happen on the buyer's side, right? So you as a buyer have to be aware, making sure you're not committing any kind of mortgage fraud. And what I mean by this is, of course, your lender is going to verify a lot of information, but sometimes things slip through the cracks, or sometimes, timelines get a little bit skewed, meaning let's say you got approved for a mortgage, and then God forbid you lose your job, but then the closing date is set for tomorrow, so you don't tell your bank and they don't verify, so then technically you've got the loan approved. I would say a lot of times that this doesn't happen as often as you would think, but you as a buyer have to make sure that any pertinent information to your financials is being shared with your lender so you can avoid being sued for mortgage fraud. The next type of fraud is what we call hidden costs and liens. These are liens that are effectively placed on a property because, let's say, the previous owner maybe had like a dispute with a contractor that they didn't pay off, or there was a loan that they took out that they never paid the balance off, and now there's a hidden lien or there's a lien on the property that doesn't come up in the title search, or that actually the seller's attorney or the seller doesn't want to disclose to you because they want you to be stuck with it. Oftentimes in New York State, at least what I like to definitely make sure of is looking through all the liens in a title search and making sure that if there is, let's say, solar panels on the home, that the solar panel liens or the financing company or the leasing company that the current owner is getting the solar panels from also show up on the lien history, because those things might transfer over to the new owner, and you want to make sure you're fully aware of what's going on here, especially if you want to go back to the negotiation table and figure out if there's a valuation that you might be okay with, especially if the lien amount came up to be a lot more than you expected. The next type of scam is what we call a foreclosure scam. Now, typically, this will happen to people that fall behind on their mortgage payment or are facing pre-foreclosure. I have a social media video about the New York State law that actually helps prevent people from taking advantage of homeowners that are facing foreclosure or pre-foreclosure. But you definitely should look up your rights and look up what you can and can't do, especially if you're facing foreclosure as a seller, but you as the buyer, you also have certain obligations that you have to stick with legally, that you have to make sure you're abiding by, especially when you're buying a foreclosure property. And the foreclosure scam that mostly what we see happen is you'll get approached by people that know you're on in foreclosure, and they'll say, hey, we're here to help you, we're here to do X, Y, and Z, help alleviate the stress, whatever it is. They might sound like they have your best intentions in heart, but all of a sudden you end up selling them the property at a very big discount, because then they sign you into a contract for a valuation of the property that's a lot lower than what you would have been able to get, right? So that's one type of foreclosure scam that you have to be aware of. I'm not saying everyone that approaches you is necessarily a bad person, but it's just something you have to always keep in the back of your mind if you're facing foreclosure or pre-foreclosure, or if you're a buyer that's interested in buying a foreclosure property. The last scam that you definitely should be aware of is what we call escrow fraud. This ties back into like email phishing scams and things like that. You'll always see that whenever your attorney sends you wiring instructions, they'll always tell you to confirm and call ahead to the other bank or the other attorney that you're going to be sending the escrow funds to before you actually send your wire, especially if you're just wiring them the amount and not writing them a check. The reason you want to do that is because if scammers were to get access to your inbox or the attorney's inbox, or something were to get lost in translation there, you don't want to send your money to like a hacker's or a scammer's bank account, because once you send that wire out and the bank says, okay, hey, you've sent the wire out, thanks for confirming, whether you do it online or through the phone, your money's gone. The scammer is not going to want to return it to you, right? So it's going to be very rare for you to get that money back. So you always have to be extra careful. So what I recommend to all my clients is make sure you call ahead with the attorney to make sure that the wiring instructions match. And of course, ensure you talk to your bank to confirm that the account that you're sending it to is maybe located in the same area that you're buying the property, or at least matches the vicinity of the area of the attorney's office or whatever it is, just to make sure that the numbers and the details align there. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun making it because these are the most common scams that you'll see when you're mostly on the buy side of the the purchasing transaction here. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next week. Bye bye now.